one more time. If you're on Facebook, push like, comment, and share. If you're on YouTube, push like, comment, and subscribe. Okay. So we're gonna talk about the city of Belton, and not only that, but who is running the city of Belton. Him, and of course he's circled around a lot of good staff that's around him, and it takes a unit to come together to make as one. And so we just so excited. So I want you to welcome Mr. Wayne Carpenter to New Day Fellowship Church, and also to Temple, Texas, which is just only 8 miles away. Appreciate you, sir. And, we thank you for coming and sharing, your testimony, your story of what's going on, how things going on, and how you was raised up. So take it away.
Well, thank you, Reverend Beeman. It's an honor to be invited over here. Don't spend much time in Temple. I'm pretty busy in Belton, as you know. We've had a really busy time recently, lots of growth going on in the community. But just a little background, as you ask. I was born in Belton in the old hospital that's no longer there, the Sewell Long Clinic, almost right downtown. My family came to Belton in 1852.
Wow.
My great-great-grandfather was a Methodist preacher and came to Belton from Kentucky when it just got started, because Belton was founded in 1850. So he got here pretty soon after it got started, and he actually preached to the congregation at that time that I belong to today. That building wasn't there. It was built in 1888, but carpenters have been here longer than dirt, as somebody told me once. So the roots go real deep in Belton. So as you said, I'm currently serving as mayor. I've served on city council for many years, not consecutively. I actually started on the council when I was still teaching school.
Wow.
Believe it or not, I was teaching government and driving the school bus for some good folks back then. And I was always preaching to the kids at the end of the year, if you don't go vote, I'm going to come back and haunt you. I want everybody to get registered. I want everybody to vote. I can't tell you how to vote, but I can tell you better vote, because the government's important to you. And one day, right before school's out, one young man said, "Well, Mr. Carpenter, you're always telling us we need to get involved in government. Just what have you ever done?" And I kind of went home and thought about that for a while, and there was a city council election coming up, and I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. I'll run for city council. I don't have any experience in city government at this point in time. My experience was teaching government, studying government in college and graduate school. But I decided to run, and that year there were 7 folks running for 3 positions on the Belton City Council, and I was fortunate to be one of the 3 that won. Awesome. I think probably some of my seniors who are just now able to vote probably helped a little bit. I hope they did. But that's how I first got involved in city government. As far as growing up in the city, I started throwing the Temple Telegram when I was 14.
Wow.
Because I found out at that point in time, the Telegram had a policy that the boys delivering the paper, and they were all boys back then, had to have a motor scooter or a motorcycle. And so I thought, man, this is great. If my parents will let me get this little motorcycle, then I can deliver the paper and pay for it. So that's kind of how I got involved in motorcycles, and I'm still riding almost 60 years later, still riding motorcycles every chance I get. But I threw the newspapers for a while. I graduated from Belton High School, wound up going to Mary Hardin Baylor and getting a degree there after bouncing around a couple of places, and got married too young, and wound up started working for the Central Texas Council of Government. So that was actually my first governmental experience. And then the job came open at Belton High School, and Mr. Joe Pirtle was kind enough to give me a chance to teach at the high school. And I spent 10 real good years teaching at Belton High School, teaching government. Drove the school bus, as we've joked about before, and eventually went back to graduate school a second time, and got mid-management certification so that I could become an administrator. My first administrative job was Central Elementary, which is no longer there. It's changed names a couple of times, but I was an assistant principal at Central Elementary. And then I was named principal at Leon Heights Elementary, and I served a total of 7 years at Leon Heights Elementary. Eventually, a couple of other little stops along the way, but I eventually wound up in central administration. I was the HR director and then the assistant superintendent, and finally I was deputy superintendent for about 5.5 years, I guess, before I retired from the school business. And after I retired, my wife and I traveled around quite a bit. And then I, for some reason, decided to get back on the city council and eventually wound up becoming mayor. So it's kind of a circuitous route to get back sort of where I started, but it's been a really good trip. And my wife and I have been married for 32 years. I had one son that's teaching at Baylor. And when we got married, she had 2 sons, so we had 3 boys and all the bills. And
all bills.
Her son, oldest son Eric, works in Georgia and in Atlanta, and youngest son actually lives here in Temple. And we have 7 grandchildren, so we're very blessed to have that. And 1 grandchild here, 3 in Waco, where Brad teaches at Baylor. He teaches in the administration. People who think they want to become principals and work on their masters and PhDs, that's who he teaches. So he was a principal at Sparta Elementary for a little while before he went back to UT and got a PhD, and then eventually wound up at Baylor, and he's really enjoying his life at Baylor. So that's a little background.
Okay. Now, what do you see that you didn't see back in the day about how Belton has prospered, not only prospered, but advanced than what it was when we was growing up?
Well, several areas, really key areas. Number one, I'm so old that I remember the days of segregation. We didn't fully integrate Belton High School until it started when I was a freshman. Tommy Parker and a couple of other folks came over to the school. And then the next year, several of the students from Harris came over. The 3rd year, I believe it was, is when they closed Harris, and we all went to school together. But I remember those days of segregation, and when kids couldn't go to the swimming pool, or, everything in society was segregated. And growing up as a child, as a white child at least, you don't really realize the full impact of that until you get older. And so obviously that's been a major improvement in terms of relationships. But I do remember during that time there were quite a few black-owned businesses in town, and most of those unfortunately have disappeared. So, I mean, that is the one negative that I can think of in that sense. But we did have a very smooth integration process in Belton. I know here in Temple, I know they got involved in some federal lawsuits and quite a few issues over that, but it did go well in Belton, and I think part of it was the leadership of the school and the leadership in the black community. And as a student, I thought it was very smooth. We really had very few problems with that process, but obviously that's a big improvement. The other big improvement was downtown Belton for many years was just, I don't want to say dead, but it was very limited in terms of business. We did not have any vitality. There were very few places to eat downtown. Shopping was pretty much limited to Cochran Blair and Potts and a couple of other smaller stores. So downtown has gone through a real revitalization really in the last 5 years. Even 10 years ago, if you came down on Friday or Saturday night at 5:05, downtown was pretty much empty. Now if you come to downtown Belton on Friday or Saturday night or Sunday afternoon, there's people all over town. There's restaurants that are open. There's kids playing down behind the gin and the creek. We have channelized, I guess is the right term, Nolan Creek as it comes behind the gin area there. And we have kayak runs going on right now and kids floating down the creek. And you just see a lot of activity in downtown Belton, and we have a lot of interest from other folks about investing in downtown Belton. So the growth in the area has really benefited our business community. And the population of Belton has exploded. We're just at 25,000 right now, and I hear Temple is close to 80,000. So if you take Belton and Temple together, you're looking at over 100,000 people here,
Wow.
side by side. And certainly Killeen has outgrown all of us. Killeen's 140,000 or so, so they're bigger than Belton Temple put together. Harker Heights is now bigger than Belton, and I'm so old I remember when Harker Heights was incorporated. It was in the early 1960s. So I think their population is around 37,000. So Bell County as a whole has just, the population has exploded in the last 2 decades, really. And that's made it great in terms of business opportunities and opportunities for work and those sorts of things, but it's also a real challenge to keep up with the growth and to build the streets and to take care of the infrastructure. And water is becoming a critical issue for the entire county.
Yes.
In fact, the entire state of Texas and really everything west of the Mississippi River. I mean, the western part of the United States is in a huge, terrible drought, and it's, if you look around Belton or Temple, you know that we're not far behind. It's pretty dry out there. So that the infrastructure, building the streets, providing all that, and certainly as a retired school administrator, keeping up with the school growth has just been a real challenge for everybody. I heard the superintendent say the other day that they expected 18,000 students in Belton ISD by 2030.
Wow.
And 18,000 kids in Belton ISD, I don't care how scattered out they are, that's a lot of kiddos.
Yes.
So the school district has their challenges, and as a city, when school they decide to build a new campus, then we need to be able to provide infrastructure, water and sewer and streets and all that. And so they're looking right now at building one new elementary school right away out on 436, the Hubbard branch area, and a fourth high school within the next decade or so, because we have Belton High School, we have now Lake Belton High School, and New Tech at Wasco has about quite a few students there, and then the fourth high school will be somewhere out maybe towards Shanklin Road. We're not really sure where the final decision will be, but the fourth high school will be somewhere on the south side of town. And like I said, I would expect that within the next decade, but we'll see how it goes. I may not be here in the next decade at my age, but that's kind of what's going on growth-wise. Scott and White is on one end of the area, and then Fort Hood is on the other. And I always say, I'm 100% Belton. Belton is the heart of Bell County.
Yes, yes.
But not only geographically, it's the heart of Bell County government. It's the central location, obviously, for whatever goes on. The jail complex out there on the hill south of downtown, they're adding another 900 beds right now to the Bell County Jail, and moving some of a few of the operations from downtown out to the Justice Complex. So hopefully that'll free up some more property downtown for commercial development as well. I'm not sure I answered all your questions, but
no, you have. I mean, you went in depth in a lot of things, and let's go back. Let's go back. Downtown. I remember Duke and Aries. I remember
Perry Brothers.
Perry Brothers. I remember Sugets.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the Hamburger King.
Right.
I remember a whole lot of different small places. I remember People's National Bank.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going way Dixie Discount. You could buy a hot dog for 25
cents. I hadn't thought
cents
about Dixie Discount in a long time.
And a chili dog for 30 cents. I remember Gladys's over there by Griggs. I remember those different, viewing those different. I remember Tiger Den. Mm-hmm. I remember Butch's.
Right.
Dairy Queen.
You have a good memory.
But I remember all those different places, and of course Griggs is right there. That was one of the hub in that area.
I spent one summer working in the factory at Griggs, and it really convinced me I needed to go back to college.
And then on Rockwell, I heard Rockwell.
Uh,
My father worked at Rockwell for about half a day, and this was way back when. He said he got the itching, and he said he just walked right off the job
I don't
and
blame
never
him.
went back. So
I worked in the factory at Griggs, after my, I guess before my sophomore year in college. We used to have to get there at 6 o'clock in the morning because that old factory, that big stone factory that burned, was obviously not air conditioned, and it was hotter than the Dickens. And I was sitting out there one morning, this time of the year, listening to the radio before I started work, and found out Bobby Kennedy had been shot and died the night before, and it just broke my heart because he was kind of my hero. And but anyway, after working in that hot environment in Griggs, I knew I was a college kid.
wow, I remember. And then Temple, there was Western Auto, and it had 76 doors. I had to open up over half of them
Oh my
in
goodness!
the morning time, and it was cold in the winter and hot in the summer, and just the way it was. And with that, with the concrete. So I used to wear Payless shoes until I started working at Western Auto, and so I don't even look at Payless no more. I have to learn to put a little more money into my feet because I need to keep mine. And you see, I still have them today. So
You realize pretty quickly how important your feet are when you have to stand up all day, don't you?
yes, sir. Yes, sir. I still remember it. But there was some times in Belton that I just can't recall. I was, of course, I was raised up in Belton, and went to elementary at Southwest Elementary, because we lived on Saunders, and before Saunders, the name was called McKay, and somehow in between from McKay to Saunders, and then from there we went to, of course, the junior high school, and then we was the second class to graduate from we would call the new high school back then, which
Right.
is the old high school now. So it just it goes on and on.
I went to Southwest Elementary in the first grade. Back then we didn't have kindergarten, so I went there in the first grade, and I started there in the second grade, and they were overcrowded, and I was a bus kid, so they sent me to Tyler. So I went to Tyler second and third grade, and we had to move, and I wound up going to Leon Heights in the fourth grade, and then we had to move again, and I wound up back at Tyler in the fifth and sixth. In those days, sixth grade was at the elementary campus, and so we only had 3 elementaries in Belton at the time, and I made all 3 of them. So at least we got to junior high. I knew everybody.
Yeah, I still remember the principal, Mr. Ernest Allen. I still
Oh,
remember
yeah,
this as
Mr.
a
Allen.
kid.
Yes, I
Mr.
remember
Allen,
him.
Miss VTech, Miss Cornelius. I'm going way back in time.
Oh, you are going
Miss
back.
Brown. it was just and
Geraldine Brown.
yes.
Yeah, she was at Central when I was an assistant principal at Central Elementary for a while.
And Mrs. Sims, I still remember Mrs. Sims. And them in their class you didn't cut up. If you cut up, then you got a paddling right there. It wasn't no, we'll call your parents. They just paddled you right there and sit you back in, and you learn because kids was laughing at you, and so not to do that anymore.
Well, Mr. Pirtle was my principal in the 6th grade at Tyler. That was his first administrative job when he left coaching. And so, obviously after he left Tyler, he went to central office and was the curriculum director, and then he was the superintendent. But I always like to think about Mr. Pirtle as we had a principal before Mr. Pirtle he and I did not G-haw.
Okay.
That's an old term, but we did not get along for whatever reason it was. And I wasn't in trouble very much, but anyway, he left and Mr. Pirtle came, and we were all just ecstatic because Mr. Pirtle was so good to everybody that we were glad to have him at Tyler. And like I said, after I graduated and was working, decided I wanted to become a teacher, and Mr. Pirtle's the one that hired me. So I've got great respect and great memories from Mr. Pirtle.
Wow. Now, do you? Now I know you. Don't call the people name out, please. But driving a bus, I know you had probably a few on there. You wish they would catch a ride somewhere else or get another bus. And I bet when you stopped off at a certain spot and you saw him, like, oh no, here we go again.
Well, on when I first started driving a bus, I had the route out around Lake Belton out to past, let's see, all the way across the dam and you turn left and go down toward Temple Lake Park.
Okay.
I had this long route, and we had some kids out there that were really a pain. But after I changed my route to what we call the city route, I'd park my bus right behind the new high school, walk right out the back door, get on that bus, and I would go around West Belton, around Miller Heights, and out by what we call the Belton Garden Apartments at that time.
I still remember
And
that.
that bus route was just great. I hardly ever had any problem with kids on that bus. We got along really well. I did have one kid one time who had moved into Belton from New York City or New York State, I'm not sure where. And I got on the bus one day and I said they were being rowdy, and it was not like my usual group, and I thought, what's going on? And I said, now y'all settle down, what's going on? And this young man called me a really, really bad name that I will not repeat to you. And I looked at him, and everybody on the bus is going like, oh no, something bad's going to happen. Mr. Carpenter's usually very mild-mannered, and I don't know what's going to happen anyway. And I said something to him. I said, you need to come up here. We need to. And he called me something else.
Man.
And so I thought, I just went in and got Mr. Agnew because he was the assistant principal. You remember Mr. Agnew?
He was my coach.
He's a great guy. He was a coach and everything else. And, he would come out there with his shirt tail hanging out. He was ready. And he said, come on up here, young man. And the guy said, I ain't going nowhere. Nothing you can do about it. And Marvin just turned around and walked right back to the building. And I thought, that's not like him to take care of it. And about 5 minutes later, the police car comes up. They go back there, grab that young man, put handcuffs on him, and take him off the bus. I never saw his face again. I don't know where he went, what they did with him, but that was the only time I ever really had any trouble on that bus.
They better shipped him back to New York.
I'm not sure where he went, but I never saw him again. So,
wow.
But it was not a difficult job. I actually enjoyed that one, other than the fact that early in the morning it was cold as the dickens on that bus. But and the old bus that I drove, since I had such a short route, they gave me an old bus that you had with standard transmission, and you had to double clutch it. And if you tell somebody now that you had to double clutch something, most people don't even know what a clutch is, much less that you had to double clutch it. But it was an old bus because it was the city route, and I didn't ever have to get on the highway or anything. When I drove the lake route, I had a nice new fancy bus, but city route, you kind of got that. When I left, Mr. James Burrell took over that route, and he drove the bus in Belton for 50 years, maybe just a little over 50. He just amazed me that he just kept on trucking. He was just a great guy. I really thought a great deal of him. But he and I had the route first. They created that route, and then when I went to administration, Mr. Burrell took it over, and he drove it till he finally retired.
Now the gaining all the wisdom that you have thus far, and there's still more to go. How do you get any rest? Because I know you probably laying down and this going through your mind. Okay, I got a meeting tomorrow. I got a meeting this. I got 3 meetings the day after that, and we got to talk about this and that. And you have to have your stuff together. I know that for sure. So the idea is, how do you get some rest? How do you find time to relax yourself?
Well, several years ago, we have a small house that we've lived in for a long time. In fact, I helped my daddy build the house back in the 1970s, and it had been paid for a while as a result of that. And my wife, about 15 years ago, decided that we had to have a swimming pool. And I didn't really want to build a swimming pool because it cost a lot. It cost money that I didn't really think we could afford, and it was going to be a lot of work. And it's the best thing we ever did because this time of the year it kind of saves your life. I can have a bad day at City Hall and come in and run out and jump in the pool and swim around for 15, 20 minutes, and it takes your mind off what you have to face at City Hall or complaints or whatever.
Yes.
So that's one way to relax. And I love music. I still like 60s music. I'm old-fashioned when it comes to old rock and roll, but I do listen to that, and I read a great deal. I mean, I'm just like to read newspapers and read a couple of 3 online. Now it's easier to read them online almost than it is to get the physical newspaper. But I still get I still get the daily paper, at least one, and the old paper boy in me, can't totally do without the newspaper. I think that's one thing that people are missing today. One reason we don't communicate as well with each other is we don't have any common news source. When we were growing up, if you watched the news, you watched one of the 3 networks, you watched Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather or whoever it was, and you read the local newspaper. And we all kind of read the same local newspaper. And when you were talking about things, people had some common source of information. And now most people don't read the newspaper. They get their news from Facebook or Instagram or wherever, or they watch only one channel that's real conservative or one that's real liberal, and they don't get but one side of the story. And I think that's one thing that's really led to a lack of communication and more, I don't know what the word for it is, but the inability to have a normal, polite conversation and agree to disagree about things politely. When I was growing up, we obviously didn't all agree. My grandparents were Franklin Roosevelt Democrats, and my parents, so we grew up a certain way, but we had friends who didn't, and we could talk about it. Now it's like if you don't agree with somebody, they attack your personality, or they attack your family, or they start calling names, and I'm like, that's not the way I was raised. That's not the way you were raised, I don't think. And I think that's makes it really hard when we're talking about presidential politics or even local politics. I mean, I think I mentioned this to someone the other day, George Harrison, that's who it was. He asked me about the statue at the courthouse. And I said, well, I've got strong feelings about it, but I'm not in a position to do anything about that. That's a county issue. And I said, when the city council and I decided to change the name of Confederate Park to Liberty Park because we felt like it was the right thing to do, I got hate mail, from people that I thought better of.
And go to church with and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I can understand, okay, you can have a legitimate disagreement, but to, call me names or whatever because we don't agree, that, like I said, I don't want to belabor the point, but that's just not the way I was raised. We could agree or we could disagree, but we could still be civil to each other. And that seems to be a very difficult thing to handle, and even in the church. Our church, as I said, I'm a Methodist. Our church is about to split apart, apparently, over the issue of LGBTQ rights. And it just breaks my heart to think that we can't get along, disagree, but get along and stay in the same church. But I read the other day the Waco First United Methodist Church was going to leave the church, was going to leave the denomination, and maybe Temple was. I don't know. I don't know what will happen to Belton, but I just think, church attendance overall is declining anyway across the country. And to split yourselves apart over, I don't know, like I said, it breaks my heart personally, but I'm not a preacher, obviously. I have a lot of, no, bless your heart. I'm glad you're doing it instead of me, Robert. But it does hurt me because I think the more we split apart, the harder it is to make progress. The more we can agree and the more we can come together. I don't care if it's about a racial issue or a political issue are an issue within the church about those kinds of things, if we can stay together and talk about it, we can get better. If we
That's
just
true.
go our own way and talk and start talking nasty about, well, you know, those folks over there, and that's what happens too
Yeah.
often, I'm afraid. So,
Yeah, I remember the statue. I used to walk by there every day. Didn't pay no attention.
Right.
I just walked on by on the road and kept on going. You know, didn't bother me. Now I didn't think about it until I became an adult, and they talked about. I said, "Oh, that what that was?" I had no clue what it was.
right.
I didn't know Yetipoke Park was called Yetipoke Park. We just said
It was
the
just
park.
a park.
Yeah, we
It
said
was the
park.
creek. It was the creek, and it was
Yes.
the park.
After I got of age in the mid-20s, found out it was Yetipoke. I said, "Where's Yetipoke Park?" And they said, "Where you went every day?" I said, "I did not know that." You know?
Yep.
Yeah. And we all got along. I still remember the swimming pool where the downtown.
The natatorium where I learned to swim.
I
Yes.
still remember that. Yeah. I mean,
Yep. I remember the natatorium, and as a kind of a local historian, the natatorium was a showplace of its time.
really?
There was really nothing else like it in Central Texas, almost nothing like it in Texas, because it had indoor swimming pool, outdoor swimming pool. It had bathhouses back at a time when a lot of folks didn't have, you know, showers in their homes and that sort of thing. We didn't have a shower in my house when I was growing up. You had a bathtub. That's what you did. But it was really a fancy place. And if you can see some of the old pictures, when we had the low water dam there, and we used to have canoe races and stuff down there. My grandparents' house was there on South Main Street. You know where that little grocery store is? At 414 South Main Street. That was where that's where my daddy was born.
Wow.
And they lived there for, Lordy, I have no idea how long they lived there, but my granddad passed away in 1955, and it was an old house then. But they tore it down in the late 60s, and then they built that convenience store. But, you know, he used to play in the creek all the time. And the black kids played in the creek. The white kids played in the creek. It was just the creek. I mean, that's just the way it was. And I mean, I know he knew some of the families that lived 2 or 3 blocks. I mean, people lived right there on Pearl Street, 2 blocks behind there, and the kids played together. And then when they started school, it was like you split everybody up and send them different directions. But, there were some better things about those days. Not all of them, but there were some positive things about it. But you're right, back to the statue, the county's going to have to face the issue at some point in time, but it's not going to make anybody happy. Well, I shouldn't say anybody. It's going to make some people very unhappy and some people very happy.
Right.
But when I was a kid, I never thought about it either. I'm just like you. You go by the courthouse, well, that's the courthouse. Well, there's an old soldier there. Well,
never read it.
I didn't. I
Never
don't
read the
remember.
script or
I
nothing.
don't remember paying the least bit of attention to it,
Yeah.
except when the senior class, a couple of years ahead of me, stole all the cannonballs off that thing and rolled them down Main Street middle of the night one night, and I think they finally repaired it and put them in there where they could not be moved.
Wow.
But I think it was, I don't remember which class it was. It was a couple of years ahead of me in high school. But apparently they got all those cannonballs. Somehow they got them loose and got down in Central Avenue and rolled them down the street before the police caught up with them. So anyway, that they did that, and they climbed the standpipe over there, which back to the city, we're trying very hard to restore that, not to store water, but we're going to make a park around it.
Yes, sir. Okay.
And we thank goodness we've got some of that American recovery money that the federal government passed, and we're going to use part of that to do that, to create a park around the standpipe. And we're also going to make a grant to Mount Zion to try to restore the historic part of that church. So those are 2 things that I'm really pleased that city is able to do. That makes me feel good about being mayor, when you can do things that you feel like are really going to help the community.
Yes.
And I know those will. And we also have a lot of we're giving out grants to 20-something businesses that were impacted very negatively during the COVID time period.
Right.
And we had a process to do that, so we're getting ready to do that. We've already passed out money to Helping Hands and Meals on Wheels and a couple of other organizations within the city that we were able to get as a result of those federal funds.
Thank
so,
you.
Really pleased with that. Helping Hands is doing a great job, and more people need it with the inflation and everything that's going on in the world right this minute.
Yes, I mean, I'm just amazed how I see Belton growing. You know, not like Temple's not growing. You know, of course I live here in Temple now, but I've seen the advancement that I have not seen before. I was overwhelmed when Belton first got a Sonic. I think I was in high school, and that was the hangout spot for a little bit,
Yep.
the Sonic, and I like those onion rings, big thick onion rings. They don't make them like that anymore.
You're making me
They're
hungry
like
now.
this and about 5 times more than what we used to pay for.
Yep. We're fixing to get our second Starbucks. Can you
Wow.
believe that? We're really uptown. Yeah, it's going to be out there on North Main Street by River Fair, close to the Grand Avenue Theater.
Wow, yeah. That's a good
So
spot.
we'll have the one down the highway and then the one out here. But when I was growing up, it was the Dairy Queen and down on Central Avenue, and that's what we did on Friday and Saturday night was drive down and go around the Dairy Queen a few times and look for girls, and then go down to the Teenage Canteen down in Yeti Polk Park, as you mentioned, where the city finance department is now. That was what was called the Teenage Canteen, and it was, I guess it closed before you were in high school.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That was a really great thing for the kids because there was very, very little to do in Belton at the time. And we would go down there on Friday, Saturday night and play ping pong or pool or usually play records. And on a rare occasion, we'd have a live band. Jay White, I don't know if you know Jay, was a couple of years behind me in high school. He had a little band at the time, and they'd come down and play, and we'd dance. And that was the hot spot in the city back in those days. Either that or go to Miller Springs, and you get in trouble at Miller Springs. So we're supposed to go to the canteen, not to Miller Springs.
Right. Yeah. You tell your parents one thing, you end up somewhere else. I think we all have probably experienced that one time or another.
I think the statute of limitations has run out on that one. I hope so.
That's awesome. We're going back down memory lane. I still remember Beltonian.
Yep.
I just remember it all. And they would play karate pictures when I was growing up. And Mama would give so much amount of money just to get in. And she told me, eat before you go. So that was my job, to eat before I go, because we didn't have no money to get any popcorn, pickles, or anything. And so all the other guys been having popcorn, pickles, and I'd be looking at it, and stomach all growling and everything. I said, that's why Mama told me to eat before I went, you know. So I didn't know that. So I've learned some things. So after we watched the karate pictures, we go down to Yeti Polk Park and practice karate, even though, you know, and then you know how they had those words. And I'm going to, you know, it didn't correlate. You're like, what they saying? You know, they're not even talking. You know,
that was after my time. We didn't have karate movies when I was like. I did go to the Beltonian when I could. I remember John Wayne and the Alamo. I think about 1960 when that first came out. I do remember that when I was in, I don't know, sixth grade, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, somewhere along in there, and everybody wanted to see John Wayne at the Alamo. I think that it must have played for 2 weeks down there because everybody in town wanted to go see the Alamo at the Beltonian Theater.
Wow.
So, and they're doing a good business again. I noticed they're doing a lot of old movies. They're doing a lot of kids stuff this summer, and I think the man's name is Zachariah Baker. He's done a great job of revitalizing that. If you haven't been in there in a long time, you need to stop by sometime and say hello. And they've redone the seats, and they've got new equipment, and turned into a really nice little venue again after all these years. So we gave them a plaque back in, I guess, early May. It was 100 years since the Beltonian first opened up. And it was interesting because at the time that they built that theater, they had a contest to name the theater. The Chamber of Commerce way back then had this contest, and the winning person who named it the name they picked would get, I don't know, free lifetime tickets or something. I'm not sure what, but anyway, that's how the Beltonian got its name. It was the winning name in a contest in 1922.
Wow.
When they first opened up.
So that was about what, 3? No, I must play.
Yeah.
Born.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, I was born in the '60s, so.
Oh yeah, I remember the '60s quite well.
Mm-hmm. So you said you're a rock and roll band. What's one of your favorites?
Oh, just lots and lots. When I was in ninth grade is when the Beatles came out, and I was just at the right age, and we were all just blown away by the Beatles because it was totally unlike anything that had ever come before. I had older cousins, a couple of older girl cousins who were just madly in love with Elvis. And if you remember reading, Elvis actually came to Belton several times, and he actually got his hair cut down at Jackson's every once in a while.
Now, this was stationed at Fort Hood?
That's when he was stationed at Fort Hood.
Oh, Hood? Okay.
He was stationed when he was stationed at Fort Hood for a while, and there was a picture I saw many years ago. He was in there, and I think it was, I don't know if it was Wayne or Ernest, one of the Jackson brothers was giving Elvis a haircut. And my older cousins, they were just crazy, and they were always trying to go to Fort Hood to see Elvis, but I don't think they ever ran into him. But when I was growing up, it was the Beatles, and then the Rolling Stones, and the Dave Clark Five, and all those kinds of English groups that were so popular. And so that's what our entertainment, like I said, at the Teenage Canteen, whoever got the latest Beatles record or the latest Rolling Stones record, you'd take it down there and play it, and we'd dance to those kinds of, silly dances that don't require any real talent, but they were a lot of fun at the time.
Right.
So that's pretty much was our entertainment. But I still listen to a lot of those oldies, and Buddy Holly was one of my huge favorites. And of course, he got killed really way too early, but really a super talented guy who would have done great things if he hadn't. Sam Cooke. It was just a lot of great music in the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, I know old people say that, but I think the music was better back then than it is now. At least it was to me.
Yeah.
So I guess it's whatever you grew up with and whatever you're kind of accustomed to. But I was listening to an old Beatles CD on the way over here, so that tells you how I'm kind of stuck in that time period. A lot of the Eagles, which that was much later, but just good stuff that I could sing badly too.
Yeah.
My wife has a beautiful singing voice and sings in the choir, and I sit up in the balcony where they can't hear me. So, but I love music anyway.
Yeah. Well, I recall, like I said, it was more of a love songs back then, and you could hear what they're saying. They had bands,
story songs.
Yes, now they
tell
just
a story,
tell you what they want, and
and
hurry up and give it to me, and all this other stuff. I like, woo, just it's kind of it's hard to I don't even listen to it because it's too far for me.
Yeah.
I'm still in the old school. We used to walk through the park and hold hands with with the one you think you love, and you get excited. You say, well, God, if you let me marry this person, I'll be happy. And then a few years later, you say, thank God for unanswered prayers. You're like,
yep.
Glad that didn't happen.
Some of those old, if you remember the doo-wop music, I used to love it, and I still do. Pandora, we have the Pandora on the little speakers at home, and I'd say, Pandora, play doo-wop music. And, they play all those, like the Duke of Earl and all those kinds of things that you could sing along with.
Frankie Valli. Okay.
Oh, yeah. The Four Seasons, the Supremes. All, you could sing along with so many of those songs. And I can remember riding around with a girlfriend and singing together to listen to the radio, just what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
You can only go to the movies. one movie theater, you kind of run out of things to do without getting yourself in trouble. So you go around and cruise the Dairy Queen and listen to the music and just kind of enjoy the evening. That's kind of what we did. Today, people think you have to spend a great deal of money to be entertained, but we didn't know any better. Number one, we didn't have any money, but certainly didn't know much better because we didn't. It just wasn't around. Not in a town the size of Belton. You know, when I was probably graduated from high school, I imagine that Belton probably had 5,000 to 6,000 people. I mean, it was a small town, and you know, Temple wasn't very big either, for that matter. I mean, they had the Arcadia and a couple of other things that we didn't have, but there wasn't much to do in Temple either. I mean, it wasn't like going to Austin or something. Nobody ever thought about going to Austin. That was, you know, might as well be going to New York City. You didn't get out of Bell County.
Right,
I mean,
right.
My wife has always talked about, you know, her mom said, you don't ever go out to the lake, you know, and you just get in trouble going out there. You go, you know, don't go parking. You don't do this, don't do that. And we pretty well behaved at the time, I think. Most of us were anyway.
Well, you was good when I did the opposite. So they told me don't do this. What I did, just curiosity. It got to be something to that.
Well, yeah.
You know? And paid the
I did
price.
a few things I wasn't supposed to, but for the most part, we were pretty good kids. Because, like you said, your parent, if you weren't a good kid, your parents would find out about it because everybody knew everybody.
Right.
You know, our high school graduating class, I don't know if it's 130 or I can't remember now exactly what it was, but I mean, I knew everybody that I graduated with, and most of them I'd been to school with for years because there weren't a lot of people moving into Belton in the 1950s and 60s. It was a pretty stable community. We finally started growing a little bit, but I had kids that I graduated with that I'd gone to school with since first grade, second grade. I mean, it was a very stable and slow growth kind of a situation, totally unlike 2022.
Yes.
And I kind of miss that, you know, in terms of knowing everybody and the stability of the community and all that. But times do change, and we're right in the middle of a very difficult time period, I'm afraid.
Yes, big time. Okay, we're about to wrap this up, but let's talk about your great-grandfather. I know you probably didn't know him, but was it instilled that you all was going to follow behind his footpath, or?
No, it really wasn't at all. I didn't even realize it at the time. When my daddy and my mother got married, and he had been in the Navy in World War II, and came back home, and he and my mom got married, and she was from a very strict Southern Baptist background. And so he quit going to the Methodist church, and I grew up as a Baptist. And I didn't become a Methodist until, I don't know, 40-something years ago is when I left the Baptist church and joined the Methodist church. After Ann and I, she had grown up as a Baptist too, and we knew several people in the Methodist church and started attending and just found out we felt like we fit in better there.
Okay.
And I kind of started doing the research because I knew that the Reverend John Carpenter had had been the preacher at our church, so I kind of went back and looked at church records, and he was there a couple of times, and I think in the very late 1850s and the early 1860s, just about the time right before the Civil War began, and he is buried out here off Kegley Road. Okay. In fact, his daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Carpenter, married a man named Sim Kegley, supposedly the first church wedding in Bell County. Wow. And Kegley Road is named after the descendants of that union.
Wow, history.
And, of course, Temple didn't exist at that point in time. It was just on the outskirts of Belton. You know, Belton is much older than Temple. Belton was founded in 1850. Temple didn't come along until the 1880s as a result of what I refer to as a railroad scandal of the 1880s, because the city of Belton had a contract with the Santa Fe to build their main headquarters in Belton, and they woke up one morning and realized the Santa Fe was building their route over here on the hill, and it wound up in court, and Belton finally won the case, but they lost the war because Santa Fe went ahead and built all their stuff over here and created a new town. And at that point in time, the railroad was everything. and Santa Fe built all their switch yards and all that stuff over here, and so Temple took off and grew and kind of left Belton in the weeds for many years. And lots of folks in Temple don't like to admit that, but that's history. Patty Benoit, who writes for the Telegram, wrote a really good article about that a few years ago, about how it all transpired. But that didn't happen just in Belton Temple. It happened in other places, because when the railroad would come through, speculators would buy up land and wound up, well, if you get to build that railroad through my, money did change hands.
Yes.
So that's how Belton was here, like I said, 30 years before Temple even existed. When the Santa Fe came through, they also created Nolanville and Killeen and lots of other places. In fact, I don't know if you remember, but the original name of Belton was Nolanville.
Nolanville?
Nolanville.
I didn't know that.
In 1850, when they organized Bell County, first thing is laying out a new county. First thing you do is lay out a county seat and courthouse, etc. And so they built a log courthouse down by the Nolan Creek, and they named the community Nolanville. And about a year later, I don't really know what the reasoning was other than they didn't like the name, but about a year or so later, 1851, I believe, late 1851, right along in there, they changed the name of Nolanville to Belton. And so the Nolanville that exists now didn't exist until the Santa Fe Railroad built their line through there and created that as a water stop. Back in the steam engine days, you had to have stops every so many miles so you could put water in the steam engine.
Right.
So that's how Nolanville and Killeen got going, was the railroad. But Belton was here as a result of organizing a brand new county. Bell County was part of Milam County originally, and Milam County was a huge county, and then as people started moving into the area, they divided it up and created Bell County out of it. So we could be looking to camera. Unfortunately, we're not.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot of history right there.
Well, I've been here a long time, Robert. Do you remember Bernita Peoples that used to write for the Belton Journal? She lived to be 102 and died last year, I guess it was, and she wrote stories for the Belton Journal all that time. She worked for the Journal for like 70 years or something. She was the last person to interview a living Civil War veteran, and I don't remember who it was, but that was a big deal at the time. But anyway, she said the first time I met her formally, I started to introduce myself, and she said, "I know exactly who you are. Those Carpenter boys have been here longer than dirt." So I said, "Well, you're right." So anyway, that's kind of history part.
I didn't notice till last year that where Leon Heights is, across from Leon Heights is the cemetery, and in front of the cemetery are Civil War veterans buried there to guard it. I said, I didn't know that. Last year, somebody was just talking to me about that, so of course I had to go investigate.
Yeah.
And went, wow, it really is true.
There are some there. Well, do you know where the South Belton Cemetery is?
Yes.
Okay, there's a lot of Civil War veterans buried in South Belton Cemetery. In fact, my great great grandfather was the preacher. My great grandfather was a Civil War veteran, and he's buried in the South Belton Cemetery.
Wow.
And his name was Thomas F. Carpenter, and he's got headstone there, and there are several other Confederate veterans buried in that South Belton Cemetery as well. So you do have quite a few, both in the North Belton and that South Belton. And the South Belton Cemetery hasn't been active for many years, but it's been, city's cleaned it up, and it looks nice again.
Right.
But if you ever just curious about some really old folks, that South Belton Cemetery has got some really old gravestones and grave sites in there.
Wow. That is something. Wow. What did y'all enjoy, Mr. Carpenter? I mean, I'm talking to people.
Well, tell your mom hello. Give her a hug for me. All right.
Well, I mean, you're talking about back down memory lane. This was back down memory lane. It's good to know the history of why things are what's going on now and what took place back then. There's so much history into that, and I like it. I like the history, but I have to move on at the same time. I'm not gonna stay back there. I'm gonna move on.
No, we're moving forward, and one thing my mother always said was to try to treat people the way you'd like to be treated, and I think that's my number one rule as the mayor is I know everybody's not going to agree with what we do, or everybody's not going to agree with me or like me or whatever, but I'm going to try to treat people the way that I would like to be treated, and hopefully that spills over into the city government.
Yeah.
We got a great city council. We've got a wide variety. We've got stockbroker, and we just a variety of different perspectives, and I think that makes it good. And we've got a really good city manager. I think the city's in good hands. But like we talked about the other day, we approved approximately 360 housing units at one city council meeting, and I can remember whole decades where we didn't approve that many houses, and most of those are in the city, the southwest part of the city, over Duns Canyon, all those areas out there that used to be just pasture land are just popping up with houses and duplexes and apartment complexes, and it's just incredible. It's kind of like the University of Meyerhart-Baylor. When I went there, had 1,000 students, and I think they're nearly 4,000 now.
Wow.
And they've got all those great facilities. But I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope I haven't rambled on too much.
No, that just brings me back some more, a lot of history, because I love to know about history, because I like to like how do things tick, how do things is articulate, but it came from somewhere.
Sure.
And you brought some interesting things, so I'm gonna go home tonight and think about some things.
One of the things that I meant to mention a while ago, we were talking about how old Belton was. Sam Houston actually came to Belton on more than one occasion, and in 1860, when he was governor, and Texas was talking about seceding from the Union, he made a speech in downtown Belton and urged people not to vote to secede from the Union, because he said that's a bad idea. It's going to be if you secede, there's going to be a war and you're going to lose. And Belton voted overwhelmingly to secede from the Union instead of listening to Sam Houston. So, but there's a little plaque downtown on Central Avenue that most people don't even know is there, but it denotes the spot where Sam Houston actually supposedly stood and made that speech. There by the courthouse on the other side, on the north side of the courthouse square.
I'm going to go over there and look.
You have to look for it. I have to look for it when I go, because it's not very well marked. We need to do a better job of it. But anyway, just you talk about the more things change, the more they kind of stay the same in some ways, because you can try to tell the people, they don't always listen.
Well, as in growing up, you always treated me right, because I stayed away from you. Anybody that was doing right, I stayed away from them. So they always treated me right. Oh, that's a good guy.
I don't think you were a problem to be around, that's for sure. So anyway, I appreciate it.
No, but thank you for coming and hanging out with us. I know you could be doing other things right now, probably church service, your own church service, but I'm glad you came and hung out with us and just talk about some interesting thing that would help instill the people of what's going on in Belton, and not only that, but the surrounding areas. So I really do appreciate that. And you gave a lot of history, not only a lot of history, but you have given us a lot of insight of where Belton is going, and is going and growing. So we do appreciate that. So, of course, I was raised up Belton, so I know, a lot of things about
Belton. Well, we'll
Belton.
take you back. You don't have to live over here.
Well, my wife must probably say something different. But like I said, people watching, so
I understand.
So
well, my wife's at church practicing in the choir, but they don't need me in the choir, obviously, so that's not a problem.
That's good. Well, let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Wayne Carpenter, the mayor of the city of Belton, Texas. Appreciate you, sir. Thank you for coming
Reverend
in.
Beeman. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm just Robert. I'm okay. That's in my birth certificate, Robert. I'm fine with that. I
understand.
I respect. I know you understand the respect, but I'm okay. I know who I am.
I understand. Me
I
too.
appreciate that. Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate
Thank
you
you.
coming in and hanging out with us.
You bet.
God bless you all.